Hello everyone and welcome to episode 55 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we're going to be discussing the differences between strategies and tactics within the context of either building muscle or losing body fat. Now the reason why I'm bringing this up is so many people get obsessed with the minor details, the tactics as such, and I'm going to give a few examples shortly. Yet they miss the bigger picture, the bigger strategies that must be implemented for someone to either build more muscle over an extended period of time or lose body fat over a period of time. Some examples of this, they'll focus on a tactic of, say for example, eliminating processed food, yet they don't actually track their calories and macronutrients. So if they were, for example, trying to lose body fat, they need to be creating an energy deficit, so therefore burning more calories than they're consuming. By just eliminating processed food, that doesn't therefore mean that you've created an energy deficit. You could still be over-consuming total calories to the point where you're not in the energy deficit. This is an example of focusing on a tactic, i.e. eliminating processed food, but missing the bigger picture, missing the strategy, the energy deficit that must be in place for someone to lose body fat. Another good example is a lot of people obsess with different exercises in isolation. For example, people obsess with the next best and new chest exercise, yet they don't track their weights, they don't track progressive overload, they don't track their volume over an extended period of time. And as a result, by focusing on the unique chest exercise in isolation, it doesn't really mean anything unless you're actually constantly making progress, you're adding volume, so sets times reps times load is volume, and volume is one of the biggest determining factors for hypertrophy, muscle growth. So they're focusing on the exercise in isolation, they're not focusing on the biggest strategy, progressive overload, focusing on increasing volume over time. Another good example is people focusing on intermittent fasting, carb backloading, nutrient timing, brand of their protein, yet they don't track their food intake. And again, if their goal is, for example, fat loss and they're not in an energy deficit, they're not going to lose body fat, regardless of whether they're using intermittent fasting, carb backloading, focusing on nutrient timing, or any of these other smaller tactics that need to come within a bigger strategy for someone to consistently make progress. So in the podcast, I'm really going to be discussing the key strategies that need to be in place for fat loss and muscle growth. Then once you have these bigger foundational blocks in place, then you can focus on the tactics, the different exercises you'll use in the gym, the types of food you're using to meet your daily macronutrient and calorie targets. So for fat loss, we must be in an energy deficit. We need to be burning more calories than that we're consuming. Additionally, we need to have sufficient protein. So protein is going to be our tool to maintain muscle mass during the energy deficit. Additionally, weight training within that fat loss phase will still be the main foundation of our training program. The main reason for this is to, again, maintain lean muscle mass during the fat loss phase. So these are three big strategies that must be in place, the bigger foundational principles that must be in place for someone to achieve their fat loss goals. Now, some tactics are, say for example, intermittent fasting, like I mentioned above, specific food sources, whether someone chooses dumbbell rows or barbell rows, these minor details that don't really make too much difference whether you decide to do these or not. However, this is where most people spend their time. They focus on the minor details, they focus on the intermittent fasting or the food sources, yet they miss the bigger strategy of the energy deficit, sufficient protein, having weight training as the foundation of their routine. Additionally, for muscle growth, some bigger overarching strategies that must be in place for someone to achieve muscle growth over an extended period of time is a energy surplus. As Lyle McDonald would say, you can't build muscle out of wishful thinking and thin air alone. There must be a surplus of calories that will be modified subject to progress over time. Again, sufficient proteins in there as the building blocks for creating new muscle. addition, we've got progressive overload and increasing volume over time. So these bigger strategies are in place. You're focusing on tracking your weights, your reps, your sets in the gym, and you're focusing on making progress over time. It doesn't need to be every single session, but if you were to look back at your training from 6 months, there should be progress in terms of volume, so sets times reps times load, and strength over time, in addition to having that surplus and consuming sufficient protein. Now, some tactics, again, you could apply these to both a fat loss phase or a muscle building phase, whether you consume brown rice or white rice. Doesn't really matter in the grand schemes of things. Whether you choose a Wendler 5-3-1 progression model for all your big compound lifts, or whether you choose straight sets, again, it must come within the context of progressive overload, a progressive increase in volume over time. Dumbbell curls or barbell curls, it doesn't really matter as long as you're making progress over time. Now, some conclusions and applications. As I touched on the start of the podcast, most people start their muscle building or fat loss journey focusing on the tactics, the smaller, minute details that don't make a significant difference. However, what you should be doing is focus on the bigger strategies first. The fat loss and the muscle building strategies I've listed within this podcast. Don't get me wrong, the tactics have their place, and there's certainly some tactics that are more important than others, but make sure you've got these bigger, more important principles in place first before you start experimenting with some of the tactics. So hopefully you found this useful. I know this is a slightly shorter episode than some of my previous podcast episodes, but hopefully you can really start applying that and start implementing these bigger strategies first. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton Fitness.co.uk, you can download that immediately. I'd also suggest downloading the rest of my podcast episodes, which you can find on iTunes or on my website. Also, if you want to learn more about myself and some of the services and products I have available, please also go to jameslaytonfitness.co.uk. I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care.